Welcome to the Ernie Chambers Show.
Brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, neutral. I'm back, and by saying that, I mean to where I'm in a very good mood. Kamala Harris, our next president of the United States, has finally taken center stage, and she's showing the kind of job that she can do. People should keep in mind that she was the first woman Attorney General of California. She was the federal prosecutor. Therefore, she knows how to handle convicted felons, which the previous president was, meaning Donald Trump. I'm going to get into some things, though, without going into all of that. I am running for the legislature again. I spent 46 years there. From the first day until the last day of the 46th session, I was very active, and I was not liked. And I don't think things have changed that much. I have a few items I want to touch on that occurred while I was in the legislature. Now, this is too small for you to actually read, but you can see that it is a graphic, computer generated. It shows two pistols pointing at the reader, a picture of Ernie Chambers in the upper right-hand corner as you look at it, in Old English lettering, Holy Swastika something or other of the Ku Klux Klan. And then to the top flight house inn, cotton picker. Herein warns all Ns, queers, commies, Jews, and other mongrels and race traitors. Your days are numbered. This means you. Have a nice day. And it came in an envelope that was mailed from Norfolk, Nebraska. Now, I'm not crazy. I don't have a death wish, but it's difficult for me to run away from a challenge. So what I did was before I go into that, let me read a couple of other things. This article says, threat charge, Omaha's second. An Omaha man was charged Monday for the second time with threatening the life of a president. Assistant U.S. Attorney Robert Kokota said a complaint was filed Monday with U.S. Magistrate Richard Peck charging that Kenneth J. Daniels, 27, of 1926 South 18th Street, threatened President Reagan's life. World Herald files show that Daniels was arrested in October 1979 after allegedly threatening the life of President Carter in a telephone call. He was placed on probation. Daniels allegedly called Bellevue police just after midnight Sunday, and during a 25-minute conversation with dispatcher Gail Little, threatened to kill Reagan and State Senator Ernie Chambers of Omaha. Daniels gave the dispatcher his location, and they went out and they arrested him, and they found no weapon. He was booked on suspicion of making terroristic threats, but was not charged under state law because the threat on Chambers' life was made through a third party, Omaha Police Sergeant William Norman said. However, he was charged by federal authorities under a U.S. law, making it illegal to threaten the life of a president under any circumstances. So there was one person who apparently didn't like me for some reason. This article is written about something that happened at the time I was a member of the legislature. Spectator directs slur at Chambers. A spectator in the gallery of the Nebraska legislature shouted a racial slur that was aimed at Senator Ernie Chambers, the state's lone black lawmaker. Chambers was not in the legislative chambers at the time, and he said he was not surprised by the incident. I was in my office. Quote, "It just demonstrates for my colleagues what I've been dealing with ever since I've been in this legislature, and I don't expect it to stop." Chambers said he often receives derogatory or threatening letters and phone calls. Some people even slip such notes under his legislative door, and they tack things on the door. Several lawmakers rose to denounce the remark by the 48-year-old white man who was removed from the gallery and arrested. The man who was observed dancing in the rotunda before the incident was led away in handcuffs and cited for disturbing the peace. Quote, "I think everybody was shocked," unquote, said Senator Chris Beitler. "I don't understand anyone ever shouting down a racial epithet of that nature." That was in the World Herald. Here's what the Lincoln Journal-Star said. A Lincoln man with a history of mental illness shouted a racial epithet from the balcony above the legislative chamber Monday morning. Royce Harper, Jr., 48, shouted out the N-word and Senator Chambers' name from the balcony while senators debated a bill relating to estate trusts on the floor below. He was immediately escorted by security from the balcony, handcuffed, and led from the building. Harper was later charged with disturbing the peace and housed at the Lancaster County Jail, according to State Patrol spokespersons. Chambers, the legislature's only black member, was not in the legislative chamber during the outburst, but other senators on the floor sat in stunned silence. Lincoln Senator Chris Beitler and David Landis, both engaged in a public discussion of the trust bill, spoke of their embarrassment and outrage at the disturbance. Quote, "I'm embarrassed, I'm offended for my colleagues. These kind of inflammatory fighting words are hurtful and offensive," said Landis. Chambers, who learned of the incident when he returned to the floor about 10 minutes later, said the language used did not surprise him as it did many of his white colleagues. "This kind of thing is a shock to white people, either because they don't believe it exists or don't want to believe it exists," said Chambers. "Nothing has really changed. We, as black people, are subject to this stuff on a regular basis," said Chambers, who receives threatening and offensive messages by phone, letter, and through notes shoved under his office door. Monday's disruption was the second in less than 2 weeks. Last week, a woman shouted in Spanish and English from the balcony before she was removed by security. When I found out this guy's name, I knew his father. I knew who his father was. He was an official in the Nebraska State Bar Association. So I made it clear to the authorities that I had no wish that any punishment be imposed or inflicted on him. That this kind of thing is unusual perhaps to white people in a public place, but it happens to us who are black all the time, and certainly to me. I received threats on the telephone. When my office staff would pick up the phone, either one of them, both women, would be cursed out, called racial names, and I gave them some Bible verses to quote and end it if the person stayed on the line. Now that you've gotten it out of your system, maybe you won't beat your wife or abuse your children, and then they'd hang up. But that's the way it goes. Now, here's where it says complaint names Chambers. Ex-police chief files harassment charge against state senator. He filed a harassment charge against me. The former police chief of Madison, Nebraska, has filed a harassment complaint against State Senator Ernie Chambers. John Moats, who was fired and later resigned as police chief at Madison, renewed his battle with Chambers Tuesday by filing the complaint in Madison County Court. Quote, "He's been following me around for the last 21 years, unquote, Moats said. Every time I get a job, he intervenes and sends all kinds of newspaper articles and letters to the people I'm going to work for. Chambers' latest intervention, Moats claims, resulted in him losing his job as Madison police chief. Moats told that to the Associated Press. Tuesday, he won't fight his dismissal. I found out he had a job with a racetrack out in Las Vegas, and I sent some information to them about him when he was in Omaha, which got him fired. He stuck some lunch meat down in his pants, and when he walked out of the store, they arrested him. And he was a police officer at that time. I won't read all of this, but anyway, Moats said it will be up to Madison County Attorney Joseph Smith to determine if he charges Chambers. Smith could not be reached for comment Tuesday. Chambers said Moats' claims are more evidence that Moats isn't fit to hold authority. It's the silliest thing I've ever heard, Chambers said. If I were him, I'd feel very foolish saying someone has followed me around for 21 years. Did he say I used private detectives or did it in person? Moats' charges against Chambers are the latest in a series of clashes between the two that have been tinged with charges of racism. He told the Associated Press that Chambers, quote, has a personal vendetta against me. Last January, Chambers, who is black, sent Madison officials a letter claiming Moats, who is white, was involved in racist and other improper acts while Moats was a member of the Omaha Police Department. When the city fired Moats in June, Moats claimed Chambers' letter was at least part of the reason. The Associated Press reported that Madison City Administrator Robert Gillis and Mayor Art Lee suspended Moats on May 31st, saying that the chief was being investigated for possible misrepresentations to the mayor. We go on. Moats said Tuesday that he had resigned from his job in Madison, ending the incident that started with his firing. With that taken care of, he decided the time was right to file a complaint with the authorities against Chambers. After Moats' firing, Chambers received a letter containing a death threat and racial statements postmarked in Norfolk, which is about 15 miles from Madison. In response, Chambers visited Norfolk on June 16th. He said the trip was designed to confront any racism that existed in Norfolk. Quote, I don't seek publicity, said Moats. I know Chambers loves it, but I don't seek it. Chambers said if Moats wants to get into the judicial arena, he'll have to prove everything he alleges. That should be a very interesting episode that should reveal a great amount relative to the instability of this individual. Now, Moats was dangerous. He had been involved in beating people in Omaha and so forth. But when that threat came, and it was this that I read was a part of it, in a big manila envelope, and written or scrawled across it was to Nebraska's House Inn. And that was supposed to frighten me. So what I did was got one of my sweatshirts and with red rubberized paint, painted a target, a bullseye. And then I announced in the newspaper and the radio in Norfolk and some of the others carried it, that I would be there on a specific date. I was going to give a talk at high noon in a city park. Anybody who had designs on me would have their opportunity if they were serious. And although I'd probably be the only black person there, I would not want an innocent person be harmed because of me. So he would know me by the target. After I finished that talk, I was going to have lunch at one of their top restaurants. I don't eat there, but I went there anyway. Then I gave an interview on a radio station, and everybody in Norfolk knew where that station was. Obviously, nothing happened to me because I've survived. I say again, I'm not crazy. I don't want anything bad to happen to me, but it's not in my nature to run scared. I wouldn't advise anybody to do what I did. So don't do as I do as I say do. And I tell you, don't tempt fate. You don't know how crazy somebody might be who makes a threat of that kind. Now to go on to some other things. I don't just say what I've got to say in Omaha and Nebraska. I've traveled around the country, and this is an example. Testifying before Congress is another day at the office for Chambers. There he was, resplendent in a purple sweatshirt, testifying before Congress last week. None other than Senator Ernie Chambers, part of a panel of 5 legislators from various states, testifying on a bill dealing with the same-sex marriage issue. Anyone who expected Chambers to change his attire or his style for the occasion would have been disappointed. Instead, a subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee and a C-SPAN audience were treated/subjected to the same Ernie with whom Nebraskans have become so familiar. Chambers started off musing whether the capital H-O-N period that preceded his and other panelists' names on their nameplates meant that they were being called honey. After satisfying himself that the letters stood for the Honorable, he recalled a story about a village character known derisively as Colonel, and naturally he was black. He hadn't been in the military. He wasn't old enough to have been in the last war, and he was too old to be in this one that was going on. He was asked by a judge what that word colonel meant. Well, Judge, it's just like the Honorable in front of your name. It don't mean nothing. Having thus endeared himself to the panel of congressional honorables, Chambers went on to denounce what he considered the dishonorable business under consideration. H.R. 3396 would allow states not to have to recognize same-sex marriages if they were legalized in some of the states, such as Hawaii, where a case is working its way through the courts. I don't believe in that kind of discrimination. I don't believe in speaking behind my hand or out of the shadows. I come forth and I let them know who I am. I was known in Washington, that's why I was invited to speak before Congress. How many other members of the Nebraska legislature can say that? No, not one. No, not one. Continuing. Oh, and by the way, the Supreme Court adopted the position not because of me, but of the one that I took, that if a same-sex marriage was legal in one state, then it had to be recognized as legal anywhere in this state. You can call it the contract clause. A contract legal in one state is legal wherever the person goes. Let me continue. Hawaii State Representative Terrence Tom disputed the notion that resistance to same-sex marriage stems from ignorance, saying that opposition to the idea has grown since the matter has been under discussion in that state. Colorado State Representative Marilyn Musgrave, sponsor of a ban vetoed by Governor Roy Romer, cited threatening phone calls she received to refute the idea that such legislation is a way to score easy political points. Michigan State Representative Deborah Wyman argued that legislation was needed to prevent extremist homosexual groups from achieving by judicial fiat which they could never win by legislation. On the other side, Iowa State Representative Edward Fallon argued that marriage licenses are not a scarce good, and granting them equally to gay couples would not diminish the supply for straights. And then there was Chambers, noting that proponents of restricting marriage to one man and one woman often cite religious grounds. He declared that biblical figures, including David and Solomon, had multiple wives and mistresses. That led Subcommittee Chairman Representative Charles Kennedy of Florida to ask, "Am I to understand you would support polygamy?" Chambers would not go that far. In an interview 2 days after his Wednesday appearance on Capitol Hill, Chambers said his views on gay and lesbian issues have changed considerably in recent years. In 1988, when running for the U.S. Senate on the New Alliance Party ticket, Chambers said he disagreed with the party's support of same-sex marriage. My attitude is far more tolerant than it was in years past, Chambers said Friday. I never knew I would have moved this far in that direction, but I became aware of the viciousness directed against gay and lesbian people, from verbal taunts to murder. I think it has escalated tremendously in the last few years, he added. Given his self-description as the, quote, defender of the downtrodden, unquote, Chambers has added gays and lesbians to his larger constituency. Quote, St. Jude and I collaborate in being the last hope of the hopeless, he added, with his characteristic degree of modesty. And when St. Jude gets in trouble, guess who he calls? Not Ghostbusters, me. In the face of yet another religious reference, it seemed only natural to ask Chambers, who is often described as an atheist, what description he would apply to his religious status. I'm just Ernie, he replied, to which admirers and detractors alike might say, amen. So see, I don't just speak before the legislature and in Nebraska. I spoke before Congress. I ran Jimmy Carter out of his own White House. I was among some senators invited to the White House to discuss one of those missile proposals. And while Carter was talking, he made a remark about America not being a racist country and on and on. And so when it was over, he asked for questions. So I raised my hand, and he looked around. He said, the man in the blue sweatshirt, which was me, were on the other side of the room. People looked around. They were sure that Carter, the president, wouldn't call on me to speak because Nebraskans who were there were embarrassed by my presence. I started by pointing out that I disagreed with Carter's statement that America is not a racist country. Racism is everywhere. And furthermore, why did you fire Andrew Young as ambassador to the UN when a guy named Wolf had talked to Yasser Arafat of the PLO? And they were condemning Andrew Young for similar things. I said, you didn't fire the white man. Well, Wolf was actually Jewish, but they're considered white in this country. So Carter flushed, and then he said, I disagree with you that America is a racist country. And then you know what he did? Like Moses dividing the waters supposedly of the Red Sea and the Israelites passing through on dry land, the room parted as Carter flew out of that east room. I ran him out of his own main room. Then I left, and people said I made a mistake. I should have gone to the reception afterward. I said I didn't come here to eat their food, drink their coffee. I came here to make a point if I had the opportunity, and I had the opportunity, and I made it. And some of the Nebraskans talked about how embarrassed they were. There was a reporter from the World Herald whose beat was Washington, D.C., and he said that people can be upset as much as they want to at what Senator Chambers addressed to the president. But when he opens the floor and did not say it was limited to the SALT II nuclear weapons issue, then he took a chance on being confronted in the way Chambers confronted him. So there was nothing wrong or inappropriate about what Chambers did. President Carter just did not protect himself. But when I get the opportunity to speak, and I speak my mind. Here's something else. Reminder, invitation to a dinner at the residence of France on December 10th. Ambassador Gerard Araud. In celebration of International Human Rights Day 2018, the Ambassador of France to the United States, Gerard Arraud, requests the pleasure of the company of Honorable Ernie Chambers. What Nebraska senator or U.S. senator from Nebraska has received an official, formal invitation from the ambassador of France to the United States? You can't read that, but it's on their official government stationery. Request the pleasure of the company of Honorable Ernie Chambers at a dinner to discuss the potential impact that American political and business leaders can have in the movement to end the death penalty. They knew in France about my work against the death penalty. When I finally got it abolished and we overrode the governor's veto, in Rome, you know what they did? They lit up the Colosseum and they flew a large banner across the front of it congratulating Nebraska for what it had done, not realizing that a racist governor who professes to be a Catholic, but despite the fact that the Pope had said the church is against all executions, against anybody for any purpose, while claiming to be a religious man and a Catholic, he put several hundreds of thousands of dollars, along with his father, Joe Ricketts, and by the way, Ricketts is now in the U.S. Senate. They put together almost $500,000 in an effort which proved to be successful to put the issue of the death penalty on the ballot for a vote for these yahoos in Nebraska. 60% of them voted to reinstate the death penalty. But that didn't diminish the respect that people in other countries and in Nebraska, some, and around Nebraska, the country, have for the work that I've done. I've gotten national awards from lawyers associations who fight against the death penalty. I have boxes and stacks of such things. Am I boasting? Well, even St. Paul, the imposter, they call him the apostle, he said let him boast a little bit. But at any rate, there is nothing on this earth so forlorn as a car that will not toot its own horn. Get the picture? Anyway, it will be on Monday, December 10th, 2018, at the Résidence de France, and then he gives the address. H.E., and he gives his name again, Arraud, hopes that you, Senator Chambers, will be able to join a select group of political leaders, ambassadors, academics, business representatives, and human rights advocates for an off-the-record discussion held in the framework of the worldwide mobilization for the upcoming 7th World Congress against the death penalty to take place in Brussels from February 28th through March 1st, 2019. How many people get those invitations? You didn't know I got that, did you? Because I didn't tell you. And I also was given a tribute by then congressional member, I can't even think of his name, but his father was a newscaster for KETV. He put some glowing statements and praise about me in the Congressional Record. Until the current, well, I shouldn't even use his name because people might hold it against him, but he holds a position in city government, and he and his wife were mentioned by a representative from Nebraska in the Congressional Record, and there was an article about it, and he is very deserving of it. His last name is Ewing. And I support him. And when he runs for mayor, I will support him. So I was invited to address Congress. I was invited to the White House by the president. What other international body is there that meets in this country? Why, of course, the United Nations. Now, don't tell me this scoundrel in the Nebraska legislature who ties them in knots because he knows their rules better than they do has spoken to the United Nations. They wouldn't have him cross that threshold? Well, it happens April 16th of 1983. Chambers headline, it says, "Racism here similar to South Africa's." Now, here's what happened in 1980 that led to me being called before the UN. It's from the Rand Daily Mail, the largest newspaper in South Africa. You think they'd write anything about what a black man did in Nebraska? Well, here's what it is. The headline, "An Ominous Vote in America." The South African disinvestment vote by the Nebraska State Senate is ominous. The Nebraska Senate, Midwestern. How do they know what's happening in Nebraska? Because it tends to set something going in motion that can undermine apartheid, the hardest and most rigid racial segregation in the world. And the disinvestment vote was a resolution that I got passed by the legislature. I guess it may have embarrassed them. I described apartheid. Then when the government killed a number of black students, Sharpsville, because they were demonstrating against racism, the horrible conditions under which the vast majority of people in South Africa lived. 80% of them were black. But South Africa had the kill power, the government. Anyway, the South African disinvestment vote by the Nebraska Senate is ominous. As we reported yesterday, not only is it the first time an individual American state has taken such action, but Nebraska is Midwestern and conservative, which is another way of saying just like us, racist South Africans. Its vote could well set a bandwagon rolling with incalculable consequences, and that bandwagon began to roll. Keep those wagons rolling, and I got requests from all over the country, students, other legislators, for a copy of my resolution and an explanation of how I managed to get it through. And I told them how I worked it and that it may not work for them, but anything I could offer to help, I would. Continuing. 2 points need to be made. Firstly, while the vote by the Senate is a statement about the extent of their repugnance for apartheid and obviously makes them feel righteous, it must be asked whether they have full understanding of where it could lead. For if disinvestment is taken to its logical conclusion, and if it is applied on a sufficiently wide scale, it must create the danger of widespread social unrest in South Africa. Well, they mean unrest toward white people. Black people were slaughtered all the day long. They had to carry passes to walk down the streets out of their Bantustan. These racists are the most arrogant people. Continuing. This is so because of the conditions of economic decline with even greater unemployment than we already have, which can ensue. He meant unemployment among white people. And they sold Krugerrands, gold coins. And they said every Krugerrand purchased by an American interest is the purchase of another brick in the wall of apartheid. Continuing. Proponents of revolution will welcome that, which is why such people are active in propagandizing disinvestment. But it is no way to seek a peaceful resolution of our situation, wanted as much by America as by us. Far better to look for rapid economic development to force down the apartheid barriers. Secondly, the Nebraska vote is significant in revealing how the words and deeds of Mr. P.W. Bota's government are not doing enough to persuade Americans, even conservative Americans, that sufficient change is underway here. The gap between the expectations created by Mr. Bota and what is actually being done grows wider. The sense of letdown is accentuated. Extravagant claims such as were made by Dr. Piet Koornhof when he visited America last year. Meaningful change, That is the only way to halt disinvestment and to save our country. And Chambers got that bandwagon rolling just like they said. And there were other resolutions introduced in legislatures around the country. And because of that, I and some other legislators were invited to address the UN. Chambers, racism here is similar to South Africa's. New York, Associated Press. State Senator Ernie Chambers of Omaha told the United Nations Committee Friday that Nebraska displays racism similar to the attitudes and policies that exist in South Africa. Chambers was one of 18 U.S. state legislators who addressed a UN Special Committee against Apartheid, South Africa's race separation policy. Many of the legislators are involved in legislative efforts to prevent state money from being invested in firms that do business in South Africa. 16 of the state lawmakers, including Chambers, are black. Wearing the gray sweatshirt that has become his trademark, Chambers said Nebraska is Midwestern, predominantly white, agricultural, very conservative, and in some ways manifests a racism similar to that found in the Republic of South Africa. And we were in this huge room, and there were delegates from all over the world there. And they had these headphones, and our words were translated into their language based on who had the headphones on. And almost in unison, they turned around because we were on a raised podium at the back of that large room with microphones, and they all turned back to see who in the world is speaking like that in America, and more than that, holds a political office. When they saw it was a black man, I can imagine. I think those who represented non-white countries were pleasantly surprised. Chambers suggested that the South African black majority be encouraged to strike a, quote, blow for freedom, unquote, similar to the successful, violent, bloody American Revolution against the British. People knew about that. Such African racism and apartheid exist for the same reason as did slavery in America, he said. Racism is profitable. You create a pool of labor that need not be paid adequately in order that those who feel themselves to be dominant as a race, favored by God, can live high off the hog. Chambers noted the bill he introduced in Nebraska legislature to keep state money out of businesses involved with South Africa. The South African Consul General used a special tactic against such disinvestment bills in some states, he said. Chambers said the Consul General, this is the guy representing South Africa who had an office, diplomatic office in Chicago. Chambers said the Consul General offered to fly to Nebraska to appear before the committee hearing his Chambers bill. When the committee did not take up the offer, the senator said, the Consul General invited the committee members to come to South Africa and see, quote, the great progress that is being made under this apartheid system, unquote. Chambers said he wrote the Consul General that he thought the invitation was very good, but before accepting it, Chambers wanted assurances that if he came to South Africa, he could go where he pleased, talk to whomever he pleased, and use tape recorders and cameras free of censorship. The word came back to Nebraska that if anybody did visit that country, I was not one of the ones they would like to come there. So apparently, the first-hand view that they wanted given would be a first-hand view of only those selected things that the government of South Africa chose to display, Chambers said. Now I think divestment is good, but not just to take money from that racist government. The main purpose has to be to give encouragement to those oppressed people within that country who are willing to use any means necessary to speed their freedom. And 80% of the population in that racist country was black. Here's something that was written when I gave a talk before a meeting of editors all over the state. I must hurry right along. For all his professed atheism, other people call me that because I don't believe like them, Ernie Chambers is a pretty good preacher. Chambers is, of course, the only black member of Nebraska's legislature. Oh, and this is by Doug Barber. He is the editor of one of the newspapers, and he's an official in this group of editors. He's the man Nebraska, let me go back. By his own proud estimation, he is vilified, ridiculed, and excoriated more than anyone else in Nebraska. He's the man Nebraskans love to hate. It's an image he has cultivated for more than 2 decades and a role he seems to relish. A doggedly stubborn voice for the underprivileged, the meek, the weak, the unjustly accused. A gifted legislator who loves to twist rules and issues to his own advantage and who will take every opportunity to undermine ideas he opposes. But even his most ardent opponents must give Chambers grudging respect for being an eloquent speaker and for his knowledge of both the intricate workings of the legislature and the issues that face Nebraska. I don't always agree with Chambers' views or tactics, but I have always admired him for his audacity, his intelligence, and for his respect of the power of language. He is extremely well read and is a master communicator, whether he's speaking to kids in his North Omaha district or to a gathering of newspaper people from all over Nebraska. Last weekend at the Nebraska Press Association convention, Chambers chastised, ridiculed, bullied, tried to shock, and ultimately enlightened a breakfast gathering of these editors. The crowd was, as near as I could tell, all white and predominantly small town. Chambers took the opportunity to drill the press for lack of understanding of issues and people, for being hypocritical, for being racist, both intentionally and unintentionally, and for not being effective voices for everyone in the communities they supposedly serve. But the veteran senator, in his trademark T-shirt and jeans — I wear sweatshirts, not T-shirts, jeans, correct — also reminded us of the power and sway both politicians and the media have on people's lives and the potential for good, for bad, that power carries. I got to really rush. Chambers is entertaining, thought-provoking, and as a speaker, and can pick an audience apart, then build them back up and leave them rolling in the aisles. Chambers was quick to point out his lack of belief in God. I said, I don't accept your religion. They took that to mean God, too, or an organized religion. He said that way he's not tied down to a certain dogma or left frustrated with religious rules that are basically impossible to obey. But his words held an amazingly religious ring to them. He quoted scripture. He spoke of truth, of honor, of letting people know exactly who you are and where you stand. He raised everybody's hypocrisy. He railed against it and pomposity. He said we must respect ourselves, treat others as we want to be respected and treated. He said the strong must always fight to protect and help those who can't do it for themselves. Sound familiar? I can't speak for anyone else in the room, but Chambers' talk hit me squarely close to home. And it left me taking an internal inventory of what is and is not important to me, both as a person and as a journalist. But I'm going to get down to the end. I haven't been able to answer these questions and other questions as quickly or as well as I'd hoped. But when a man like Chambers looks you in the eye and doesn't blink, it can make you very uneasy. But sometimes it takes someone like Ernie Chambers with a vastly different perspective to prick our conscience and to question our values. Like I said, he's a pretty good preacher. And that's some of what I did while I was in the legislature. And I'm running to go back. I'd use the comment, I don't campaign. That meant do all the self-promoting. You know what that means. But if you mean by campaigning that I'm suggesting to people that I'm the best person to vote for, then I am campaigning. I'll always speak in my own behalf. I will also answer directly any question put to me. I have nothing to hide. And now, as the canary said when he found out that the door to the cage was unlocked, I'm out of here.
You've been watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to leave suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This is an EWC Communications production.